was at work talking to a colleague about how lesbians aren't represented in the media. And she said, well, have you not seen that new lesbian drama involving Suranne Jones? No, never heard of it. So I rushed home. The first thing we did was binge watch Gentleman Jack, which just absolutely blew me away. From the moment Anne Lister jumped down from the carriage, I was just completely engrossed in what was going on.
It might sound odd, but around my family, I couldn't be me. I've been involved in the theatre since I was 5. And when I was in that theatre world, I could be, or I can be me. But I couldn't do it outside or off stage, or I couldn't. Like I was saying it earlier, I could not walk down the town holding my girlfriend's hand. I could not let anyone see, even in my family, sitting at the dinner table. I would let people know I'm going to work, and to be just, well, that's my friend. Do you know what I mean? And Gentleman Jack gave me it gave me it really to say, it's that I'm faith as well. And that gave me the kick that I needed to go, right, you know what? I'm not going to hide anymore.
I had literally just started having a social life. So I just started dating women for the first time. And then Gentleman Jack happened. And then it all changed from there.
Anne Lister burst onto our screens in the summer of 2019 in the BBC drama Gentleman Jack, created by Sally Wainwright. The show was based on the real-life diaries of Anne Lister herself that were discovered within the walls of her home, Shibden Hall in Halifax. With Suranne Jones as Anne, the show chronicled her life as a diarist, businesswoman and unapologetic lesbian. By her side, the woman she loved and married, Anne Walker, portrayed by Sophie Rundle. The show and the team behind it would go on to be nominated for multiple awards and garner a global audience of millions. But what the people involved in bringing the story of Anne Lister and Anne Walker to our screens could not have seen was the effect it would have on its viewers. The show would give a voice to those who had not been heard. Knowing this story would instill in people the courage to live authentically. Gentleman Jack would transform lives.
I wanted to be known when I was a child, but then I realised I was a lesbian. I still am. Check the tablets every day types. And I thought I'm a lesbian, and I thought I couldn't be a nun and a lesbian at the same time. I thought nuns had nothing. They were like a Ken doll or a Barbie doll. There was nothing. So I grew up in a very faith-filled Roman Catholic family. So I felt that I really had this urge to be a nun, but I'm a lesbian, and I can't do the two. And in that scene where Anne Walker is screaming, this is queer and it's against God, that was my teenage years. That was my mid-20s. That was my 30s. It was queer. It was against God. It was because somebody somewhere wrote something down and said, that's a sin. I was in tears. My dog shop was here, she'd tell you. But I was looking at me 200 years ago. That was how I felt. And it shocked me for 3 or 4 days. I couldn't believe it, that it's still happening now.
There was a scene in episode 3 of series 1 that deeply resonated with me. Anne was talking to Anne Lister, and they were discussing Anne's future with Anne Walker.
Nature played a challenging trick on me, didn't she? Putting a bold spirit like mine in this vessel in which I'm obliged to wear frills and petticoats. Well, I refuse to be cowed by it.
Reminded me of my childhood and how I wasn't really fitting in where I was. As a child growing up in the 1980s under Maggie Thatcher's Section 28 in Essex, there was no way for me to really truly express who I was. And by my teens, I was off the rails and I was in a really bad place. I went into this deep depression because I couldn't be myself. And I started drinking and went into this awful place. And by the time then I was 19, I was in a situation where I didn't want to be here anymore. So I had a choice to either be myself or die. And I chose to live because, you know, I wanted to express who I was, but I found it so hard to find that way forward to be who I truly was and find my own identity. Because of the way I was conditioned into believing that this is how you need to behave. And I think comparing it to that scene with Anne, she was much bolder than I was, and she was much braver. And I think that, you know, I'm proud of who I am now and that journey that I've been on, getting to be who I truly am. And I wish that I'd been as brave as Anne then, to be able to just, you know, walk as boldly and be as confident as she was in her own skin.
I have become more of who I am because Gentleman Jack brought me these characters that were not afraid to be who they were, or who learned not to be afraid of who they were. And made me feel more courageous that I could do it too. When I get embarrassed, I hide in a hoodie. That's why I didn't bring a hoodie today. When I get shy and embarrassed, I hide in a hoodie. And I used to feel like I was walking around, like, remember E17 and for Christmas it big massive hood over our head. That's what I was going around like, until there was this visual image of Anne Lister and her strength and her. I even noticed I walk straighter now. And it's not that I walk into a room like, come on, the whole room. I'm not that kind of person. But I hold more regard for me because I had nothing for me. I had no respect for me. So yeah, it gave me the courage to be me, to open up, take off that hoodie. It worked.
I think Anne Lister was a woman that was able to create, I guess, through her determination and courage, her own world. But it was a world that she kept secret, right? And I think that's very powerful for everyone to see, especially when you are a Latina like myself, where people are very judgmental, you know, if you are out as a gay woman. And I think that seeing her create this world of her own with her own sensitivity and her own being who she was, it's very uplifting and very special for everyone here to watch.
Sometimes even when I see the news or things that are going on with the political climate, I can think back to the Anns, what they went through, and circle of women, and that she loved and had relationships with, that could not be their authentic selves, that could not live an openly lesbian life back then because of the times. And it gives me strength, and it gives me, I think about them and I just think I garner strength from how they lived.
See Suranne make Anne Lister a person and Sophie Rundle make Anne Walker a person. I was very much, the only way I can describe it is in a room with the electricity was gone. I could see everyone, I could hear, no, I couldn't see everyone because the electricity was gone. But I could hear everyone, but I had no voice. I felt I couldn't be seen. I wasn't there, I was nothing.
I think Anne Lister herself in the show, watching her is quite empowering. She's like a torchbearer for anybody who doesn't fit in. She kind of gives me an extra layer of armor, like more resilience to deal with nasty nonsense that comes up in life.
Every day, I rise above it. The things people say. I walk into a room or down the street, and I see the way people look at me and the things they say. And I rise above it because I've trained myself to not to see it and hear it until it's become second nature to me and I forget. Just how impossible it is for someone else to accept that.
All of my life I've had that. Probably every day in my life at some point I've had that. And, I've had women in my life that couldn't deal with that. And so that actually is the scene that just literally brought me to my knees. And it broke me open, and then allowed me to begin to actually heal. That was a part of my life that I thought I had buried down and put a huge plaster on, and never to be seen again. And that ripped right off.
I don't think there's a week goes by where I don't get some sort of comment made, like, is that a man or a woman? Or she walks like a guy. Or I've had somebody get up and draw the curtains in their living room just because I've been drinking tea on their sofa and they were like too scared or ashamed to have anybody see me sat in their house. So you have to pretend that stuff doesn't affect you, and of course it does, but you never hear that acknowledged anywhere. So to see this strong woman on TV spelling that out and talking about it and just having a complete breakdown was really, really powerful stuff to watch.
I've experienced certain struggles associated with my sexual orientation, my appearance, just sort of vague negative feelings and thoughts that kind of linger in the back of my head since my earliest days. And when I watched Gentleman Jack, I became very spellbound by the character of Ann Lister and by the realization that she and the whole program were inspired by this real person. Socrates is supposed to have said that the unexamined life isn't worth living. And I don't think I go that far in terms of my own experience. But I do think that the deep thinking I did about my life after Gentleman Jack was really beneficial to me. And it enabled me to sort of trace the insidiousness and the magnitude of the harm that had been done to me since my earliest days. Not just me, but lots of other people like me. What had been missing in my own young life was this sort of representation, this sort of inspiration of someone I could identify with who could inspire me. It made me think that, had I known about Ann Lister, my life could have been very different, could have been better. And that there were things that I would like for young women like I was then, young girls and women, young lesbians. I would like them to have that feeling of, seeing their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences reflected in the thoughts and feelings and experiences of, the greatest lesbian who's ever lived. Ann Lister is like this shining example of how we could live our lives if we were brave enough and courageous enough. We had enough pride and sense of ourselves to be able to do it.
If I was in my childhood and had a book about Ann Lister and her life, how different my life might have been if I had had that heroine to look to when I was a kid.
I experienced my whole life that people were not always very nice to me because I think I had shorter hair before, and it was much androgyne person, and they let me know this, and I never answered, I never replied something because in the moment I was shocked, and then I thought I did not know what to reply at the first instance. And then after, maybe I had the answer, but then it was too late. And then it struck me more that why didn't I answer? Why didn't I reply? And that way, in Italy, I was more than once sent to the men's toilet because of my looking. And I never did this. But now, after the show,
I'm really, I can reply to all these rude people or people that are not so civil with me. And that really makes me feel great every time I achieve to reply to somebody, or I at least can give my view of the situation, so that I don't have to take all this hate from other person, that I really can make like a wall and give something back sometimes. And those are really so many situations. They almost every day. So sometimes my wife is not used to that. I'm not doing this, and she said, "You're so enlisted today." And she said, "Do you have really to answer everything that is like that?" And it feels so liberating for me now. And this is, for me, it's a big step. I felt taller. I walked upright. I got much easier in connection with other people. I smiled much more. I was so confident that I had all the empowerment of the show, like taken with my body. That it was really, I felt like a teenager who was like in love the first time. It felt like that.
When I came out in 2017, I was met with a lot of, it was really hard. So my biological family was not happy. I received death threats from people. I had to leave my home state within 48 hours. So I had to pack up my entire life and put it in my car and drive to my now wife, Carol. I just think about Ann Lister not being able to really share her sexuality with people. And I know that people knew that I was a lesbian and that I was queer. I know that people knew it, and I just couldn't share it where I was at, because I was raised in a very religious family. Gentleman Jack, for me, made sure that I felt validated, and I made sure that people didn't see how bad it bothered me. I was strong. It didn't upset me that my biological family didn't talk to me on the outside. It didn't upset me that I had lost friends that I had had for years. People I thought who had loved me no longer talked to me. When I was home with my wife, though, my wife knew how upset I was. And Gentleman Jack really showed that to us. With watching that and seeing me represented, I just felt, this struggle has been going on for so long, but here I am on television. Here I am seeing Ann Lister go through the same thing I went through. And people are going to have to keep going through this probably for hundreds of years. But we have each other in this like big giant world, that we're not alone, right? In our struggle, I'm not the first one who's gone through this, even though I felt incredibly alone. Ann Lister went through this, people before Ann Lister went through this, and people after me will go through this. But I found solace in the fact that Gentleman Jack showed that to the world, and people who didn't go through that saw that example. And that was powerful. Because people who have come out and have been been welcomed with open arms, they hear our stories, but they don't necessarily see our stories. They saw our story happening to a character and an individual that they loved. So they could be connected to us a little bit more.
When I was younger, I played football, soccer with C in Australia. And unfortunately, I always knew my sexuality, like that wasn't a thing, but I was very young and I didn't really maybe understand everything. And I knew my parents wouldn't like it. And long story short, I was sexually abused by a woman on my team. I'm 40 now. So since then, I basically hid who I was and felt very ashamed of who I was. I didn't seek out partners. I tried
to date men, which obviously didn't work, because I felt like ashamed because of what happened. And I felt like if I was into women, then I was somehow complicit in that or guilty of like wanting it or something. Reading Anne's journals, like she lived in the 1800s and she still was just brave enough to be herself. You feel silly saying, but something just clicked. Something just changed. And I was like, I don't care anymore. Like, I'm in my late 30s at the time, but now I'm just going to tell people who I am. I know I missed out on a lot of, like I could have, had a lot of other partners, and the prime of my youth when I was good looking and stuff, I could have, had some hot girlfriends. But reading Anne's journals made me just think, like I'm just gonna be myself now. And I tell everyone now, I say it out loud. I told my parents, and yeah, they didn't like it, but so what? And yeah, I mean, like the show is the way that that got me into that. Like you can read a book or you can, find the journals, but how are you going to do that? A show like that gets it out to the world. And if I didn't see that show, I never would have picked up that book.
I'm originally from New York, and I'd lived in California for a long time. And I hadn't seen my family in over 20 years. And I went back to visit my family, I think it was last September, actually. And I had never officially come out to them. When I was growing up, it was just a different world, and it was very scary to come out with that kind of, to reveal that much about myself. And I admit I was afraid. So I left my family for many years, and partly because of that. But when I was back there in September, I just came out to them. I just said, I lived with this woman and I've been with her for 20 years and this is my life. And of course, now that it's 2023, nobody blinks an eye. We have a whole bunch of this new generation of kids in the family that are gay and then always been out to their parents who are, my generation. So everybody was just loving and nobody had any issue with it. They just, it was just extraordinary for me. I get a little emotional about it. But I have to say that, the Lister story and then connecting with people online and everything has definitely impacted my life in a number of ways. And I think that it was helpful for me to feel relaxed and to not continue to carry that burden. It's so ridiculous when you think about it, but it really was a thing that I carried for all these years. I mean, I felt some freedom about it, just like let it go, and I'd let it go. And it was just, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful visit.
Провести, наверное, самый главный разговор в моей жизни, разговор с моими родителями. У меня очень строгая мама, строгие родители. И, в принципе, родилась я в Советском Союзе. Это страна таких нравов вообще очень ограниченных, да. И выросла я в том времени, и мне тяжело было жить со всем этим. В принципе, я думаю, как любому из нас, человеку, который родились в прошлом веке, может быть, уже и в этом веке, да. Для меня это был разговор с моими родителями, это было признание, это было принятие меня, принятие моей второй половины, нашего ребенка, и мне повезло. Мне повезло, я достучалась до них, и они как бы меня приняли, да, и, в принципе, я могу показать этот фильм своим родителям, показываю, да, о том, что такие люди существовали всегда, что я тут не одна такая, и что люди такие живут по всему миру, и что нас достаточно много.
Because I love and only love the fairer sex. My heart revolts from any other love than this.
The fact that Anne Lister was able to say that to herself, even though it was in her diaries, was tremendously impactful to me. It meant she knew who she was. And it gave me the courage to say, if she could figure out who she was so concretely, I have no excuse not to live my life genuinely, not to be as fulfilled.
When she says, this was the way I was made, and it would be against God to go against how I was made. And there was just something about when I watched that, I went, yeah, that's it. That is it. And I'm not a religious person. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, but it just kind of hit me in the heart that, like, this is who I am. If, it would be wrong for me to not accept that and try to change it. And, you only get one life and you have to live it as authentically as possible.
There's people like me out there that have been like afraid or ashamed. And then like they're older now. So it's like, yeah, it's someone you can connect with.
If I'm having to make decisions about anything or deal with any sort of tricky situations, it seems to get to a point where I'm thinking, what would Anne Lister do? It's like having this little goblin sitting on your shoulder where you maybe don't want to do something, but then it's like, well, she would. So just, pull your socks up and get on with it.
When you're a kid and they ask you, who's your hero? What do you say? Some comic book character, maybe, I don't know. But to actually, say Anne Lister is my hero because she firmly believed that she was living the life that she was intended to live, and she did it. Nothing got in her way. She just did it. And that is something to really aspire to. And it makes you think when you have things come up in your life that, well, do I really want to do that? Or should I really go there? It's like, yeah, why not? Absolutely.
I like to tap into her mentality, or at least Suranne's version of Anne Lister. Every now and I have this bad habit of being very low on myself, and I don't like to be seen, believe it or not. So yeah, always with a hood up and my head down and trying to be invisible. And every now and again, I'm just like, why am I doing this? Why am I so afraid to be seen? And then I start walking like Anne Lister, and then everything just falls into place. Like you just pick up speed, and you've got the Gentleman Jack theme song in your head, and it's like, oh, actually, I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm independent.
I'm much more proud of myself, and I think if things are going wrong, I don't be too much friendly, but I say what I want. I think it's the most important difference.
I've been able to just start making sure my voice is heard. And if that means a man interrupts me and then I interrupt him and say, no, I'm sorry, I was speaking. Other women have started doing what I do, and it is so incredible to watch because Anne Lister did that. I saw Gentleman Jack and watched Anne Lister do that in the show and went, I can do that. That's fine. That's not a problem. I can start carrying myself like that. I can be in masculine clothing and still be feminine. That doesn't define who I am. Me wearing a button-down shirt doesn't mean I'm not a woman. It just means I'm comfortable in who I am and in my sexuality and in my gender. That doesn't define me, and it shouldn't define me.
Since watching Gentleman Jack and seeing the character of Anne Lister, I live unapologetically as me. I am more confident in my own skin. I'm more able to do things that I wouldn't have been able to do before. I feel so much more stronger for knowing of Anne Lister and knowing that if she could do things in the time period in which she lived, then there's absolutely nothing stopping me from doing what I want to do and following my dreams. I care less about how I dress in front of people. I care less about what people think of me. And that's all because of the show.
Anne Lister's story is not the only one that has been an instrument of change and empowerment in the viewers of the show. Anne Walker is regarded as an icon in her own right. It was not just the courage she showed in marrying Anne Lister, but her struggles with her own mental health that has given people someone that they can identify with and whose example they can draw strength from.
I am the girliest girl you could probably ever meet. And I'd never really seen that in media. I had never seen anyone that loved women that looked like me. And to watch Gentleman Jack, and okay, she's got a big flowery bonnet on and she's got big sleeves and, you know, she wears pink. And I thought, well, that would have been me if I was alive in the 1830s. And yeah, there's just a real connection there. Everything that goes with Anne Walker about her anxiety and her mental health, and I've experienced all of that. And you know, just seeing this sort of vision in pink, pink and big hats, it just kind of made me feel like that's what I'm like. And she's here. She's with this woman who's not like her, and she loves her. And it was just the first time that I'd really seen a character in anything that I thought, yep, that's me.
Anne Walker has influenced me in ways very simple and very complex. Like very simple ways is just getting up and going to the grocery store. Used to be so difficult for me with anxiety and with depression. And so I would hear her voice tell me, rise up and go do it. You can do it.
Women for a long time have been known as the wife of. And I didn't want Anne Walker to be the wife of. You know, I wanted her to have her own story. So I was inspired by Anne Walker from the show because I realised there was more to her than met the eye. She didn't necessarily have a supportive aunt like Anne Lister did. And yet she still made those decisions to move in with the woman that she loved and live a life with her. And that's really inspiring, isn't it, to have that kind of courage?
I did have a partner that was very ill and she did pass away. And we used to watch Gentleman Jack together, and we were both obsessed with the show from day one. And when she was very ill and in her last days, it was actually one of the things that we could talk about that wasn't her illness that brought comfort to both of us. And while she was so ill and while she was dying, I thought so many times about Anne Walker. And then after she passed away, I thought so many times about Anne Walker. And just because I felt, um, I felt a kinship with her, I guess, because of what she went through. As you know, she must have sat with Anne Lister as she was passing away. And then after Anne Lister did pass away, here they were, nowhere close to home. All the challenges, everything that was going through her head, the grief that would have been going through her head, navigating all that, and then navigating logistics, where to even to start. It just, I just felt it helped me. It gave me strength, and it just really helped me through that time.
I live with bipolar disorder too, which means I have depression and studied with episodes of hypomania. So in 2018, the depression was raging. And then Kate Spade hung herself. And 3 days later, Anthony Bourdain hung himself. And it emboldened me. And I set about to hang myself. And I was hospitalized, fortunately, but that didn't stop me. And I did roll up a sheet and try to hang myself. I was caught in time. So in April of 2019, I came home, but I was far from cured. I was sleeping away my life. I had nothing to look forward to. But then there was the premiere of Gentleman Jack. And so I mustered up every ounce of energy that I had. And it hurt. It was painful because you're crippled. And I watched the show. I watched Gentleman Jack.
And then I rewatched it and I rewatched it. And I felt alive for the moments that I was watching that show. And it was a relief. But soon thereafter, the depression came back. And so I was hospitalized again. And this time, my doctors believed that my severe depression was malignant. And they recommended electroconvulsive therapy, which is ECT, which is in days past what we call shock therapy. So every other day, I was wheeled up to an OR and an operating room, and I was given the shock treatment, and I was terrified. But then I remembered, and I said to myself, what would Ann Lister say to me? And I know she would tell me to soldier on, and I know she would tell me to go on fearlessly. I made it through 22 rounds of ECT. And after 4 months, I returned home. And again, I was still suffering, but I turned to Gentleman Jack. And I just kept watching the show because I was transported to a safe place, to a place where a woman said, be strong, be fierce, rise above it. Rise above it, because I wasn't coming out at that time. I wasn't grappling with coming out at that time. I was grappling with coming alive. And I clung to anything I could to stay above ground. And again, it was Gentleman Jack. I did whatever I could to get me through so that I could be at Shipton. A yearning in me awoke. And I just needed to be there. I felt the spirit of Ann Walker, particularly. And I just needed to be there. And I got on that plane, and I couldn't believe that I allowed myself the fear of being on a transatlantic flight. But I just kept saying how triumphant I would be when I got to Shipton. So then I was there. And it was the first time in a long time that I felt alive, that I felt that life was good, and I felt like maybe life would work out for me. It was life-altering moment. While I was in the hospital, I used to wonder why did the story of these two women touch me so profoundly? And I came to realize it's because they're strong and they dared to be their authentic selves. I focused on myself. I focused on my therapy. I focused on anything I could, and watching Gentleman Jack. And I am here today. I am alive today because of Gentleman Jack. It's as if Anne spoke to me from the grave and said, get up and do something. Get up. And then so with Ann Lister's, tenacity and Ann Walker's courage, I was able to get through all that ECT. I was able to get through the depression. I came alive. I sought out friends from Facebook. I have a whole new community now because of how these two women empowered me.
It is perhaps this community that so many people have spoken about that is the biggest part of the transformation so many have seen in their lives. People who did not even realize they were missing it, and others who longed for it but never thought they would find it, have found within the friendship groups that have formed a profound sense of belonging and kinship that defies all boundaries.
When I was growing up, there was always this, people would talk about a community, an LGBT community, and I just didn't really have a concept of that. I've never really been part of a community where there are people just like me that I can be comfortable around. And I think Gentleman Jack has created that environment for people to feel comfortable, both online and in places like Halifax at different events that are now held annually.
Always felt really energized being around a group of, lesbians.
LGBT folks, and that was missing. And so I got that back. And I didn't realize how important it was for me to be able to have that culture be part of my day to day, even though folks are around the world, sharing the stories, sharing the things that have happened to us, the good and the bad things, sharing the inside jokes, and that kind of thing is culture. That's what makes up culture, is a group of people that have a shared experience. And that was a piece that was not present in my day-to-day life before General Jack. Vicky and I came across each other, I think, actually on TikTok.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry if you think that's how it reads. I'm sorry if you think, I hate that. That's what men say. I'm sorry if you're so stupid that you've misunderstood. Never said anything about stupid, nor would I. It's an ugly word. It's implicit.
That we met at ALBW. And the instant we met, it was like we had known each other forever. And there's a almost 33-year difference between Vicky and I. And yet we are as close as two people could possibly be. And that's the magic of Ann Lister's story. It bridges the gap in ages. It doesn't matter what age you are, what your age difference is. That story is the same. And I think that for me, the historical implications of the story, and that I can relate to how it used to be, many, many years ago, how difficult it was. And then for, Vicky being younger, and, it's perhaps when she, was growing up, it was, a little less odd to, be known as a gay person in school. For me, it could get you seriously injured. So I think the fact that I identify with the struggles that Anne went through and Lister went through for that, particular aspect, but it bridges that gap between us, because there's, that 3 decades of age difference, it doesn't matter. We still can identify with that same character for those same reasons. I think that's an important piece of the show. And I think, a lot of that, that has to do with the portrayals. Suranne's portrayal of Anna Lister, she couldn't have nailed it any closer. Sophie's portrayal of Anne Walker, I don't know how you could possibly pick anyone more perfect. And of course, Sally Wainwright's incredible script writing. It's just, there's just no other group of people who could have brought that and made it what it is, and created this community. I don't think it's a stretch to say it saved my life, because I was quite depressed prior to that. And all of a sudden, this woman came bursting across my screen, and I went, oh my God, she looks like me. Fair enough, I don't have the curls, but she walks like me, she talks like me, she acts like me, and she's, attracted to women like me. Well, not like me, but like I am. So it just, I can't even explain or really put into words what that did. It completely, it changed me. It literally changed me. Seeing her and, then ultimately finding the community just literally saved my life.
I had a seizure a year ago in October, and it broke my back in 3 places. I broke my back in 3 places, and it was really scary. And a couple months later, I was in the ICU on a vent, and this community reached out to my wife, and they were checking in on me on our Facebook pages and with each other, and getting updates and sharing and praying. Having this family that I was stripped away from when I came out, and never thought I would have again. My favorite part is having that now, and having these incredible people, these incredible women from every walk of life love me, love my life, love what I'm doing. I'll never
be able to say thank you enough for that. I'll never be able to tell people how grateful I am and tell everyone how much I love them.
It's not as if I just discovered the internet and the show started, but I discovered a family.
Have a shared common ground that just bonds you instantly. It's already there. It's not something that you have to work at. You know, the common ground is already there, and you can just build friendships straight off of that. There's no sort of awkward getting to know each other because you automatically have that thing in common. And particularly for us, I think, you know, there might be a massive age difference between us, but we are like the same person.
Massive.
Sorry. But we are like the same person, and I don't think we would have, well, we would never have met for starters, but I don't think we would really have found that common ground unless we'd had the show to kind of bring us together.
True.
Had I not had this community, I don't think I would be the woman and the leader and the friend and the wife and the activist that I am now.
They are my family. I don't have this at home. I don't have these people that understand that, you know, extremely important part of my life. They don't get what I'm saying about Ann Lister and Ann Walker and, you know, all things shipping. No one understands that but my Lister sisters. So that's why I'm here, because I need that. You know, it's food for my soul. I have to have that, and I can't get that anywhere but here with my people.
I've got great friends at home. You know, I've got great friends that I see regularly, and we have great fun. But it's just a different, like you say, it is a family. It's just a different level of understanding and a different level of just getting each other. And you know, like I said before, it's just that common ground that you share bonds you together so strongly. And it sounds really cheesy, but you know, I never really thought that I would be so gushy about friendships as I am. And yeah, just a great bunch of people, and we all need each other.
We do.
If Annis or Lan Walker were to pop up right now, they might think it's vulgar. But they'd possibly be happy that there's a group of women and men, we do let the odd one in, that now have a world that's exactly like their world. Nothing has really changed, except now we can all be together.
I think it roots us. I think it gives us deeper roots than we had before. I think it gives us a sense of that we've always been around. And I'm talking to you and I'm looking at an oak tree behind you, and I'm thinking it's like that, isn't it? You know, if it didn't have the deep roots, it would topple over. Sally bringing Gentleman Jack to the screen, that's its legacy. It's giving deeper roots to the oak tree of the community.
I would be lost if it was all put away and all that friendship and all that armor of community, the community armor that was built because of the show. If that got took away, I'd be ashamed. I'd be unbearable, big crash of weeks.
It's just grown so much. It's not something that you really tend to get from a television show, and it's that's going to live on for years and years and years and years. You know, we're always going to be friends. We're always going to have each other, and whatever happens with the show, and I hope we get more. I would love to get more, but the legacy is going to be that community that we have, and yeah, I think we're all really grateful for it, because it's really special.
I came across a quote recently that said, art isn't supposed to change the world. It's not meant to change practical things. It's meant to change perceptions and the way we see the world. And that's exactly what Gentleman Jack has done. It's changed the way we see the world, the way we see ourselves, the way we see history. For all the practical things it's done, like the statue at the Peace Hall, the plaques at Gogram Gate and Chibden, even the printing of the diaries by the Oxford University Press, what it has done more than any of that is had an impact on the lives of the people who have watched the show. It has pulled the Anns from behind the walls and given them back to people. And it's given them the chance for their story to inspire countless generations to come.
During orientation for grad school, someone asked me what my research and thesis was on, and I said, have you ever seen Gentleman Jack?
I cannot imagine that Ann Lister's story will ever go back behind, the walls.
What I sincerely hope the legacy of the show will be is that ultimately Ann Lister will be a well-known person, very much a part of our culture, that her brilliant work will be part of the curriculum of every high school and college, and that her influence will be felt all over the world.
I think once you see women like Ann Lister and Walker and you read about them, it just takes that burden off of you and you feel like you belong. And so that's, I think, hugely valuable. And I'm sure Ann Lister would get that, If she was here now, she would get it. She would understand how valuable her life is and sharing it, because it reaches so many girls that she'll never meet, but that she'll touch their lives, in some way.
There's a woman that is very much like me, that walks like me, really walks like me. I'm not quite as fast as she is, but with my bad knee, I'm good getting to the refrigerator in 25 minutes. But just knowing that there was, we're not, women that in my day were, classified as, or we classified ourselves as butch women. We're not new. We didn't just pop up on the scene in, the 50s, 60s, 70s. We've always been around.
And say to my neighbor and to my friends, look here, 200 years ago, that there was a woman, she lived in the same way as we do today. There's not so much difference.
No, I think we look at their actions as if they were extraordinary, but from our perspective today, and I think that's where history tells us a lot about human behaviours. It's because we're always looking back to people we can connect with. We're always looking for heroines to find connections with. But I can't believe that there is a woman that died 183 years ago today that was celebrated and the bells were tolled for her. It's an extraordinary thing, and it's literally really only been discovered recently to the wider community. And I think that's an amazing thing, and that's all because of Gentleman Jack, a television show, just a television show, but it's more than that.
How else do you learn about your own history, or even find out that you have that history? Especially now we're in a time where books are being banned again. And how do you relate to other people who maybe aren't sympathetic to your life and the things you go through? Watching their story on TV, it maybe gives other people a better understanding of yourself and helps those conversations happen.
And it's that whole aspect of the hatred that's out there now and misinformation, that we need the story of Anne and the people around them. But we need that story to show, look, hold on. You can be strong. Look at this. It was 200 years ago. Unfortunately, it's still happening today. But they survived.
What is revealed in the pages of Ann Lister's journal is what it means to be fully human. If you think about what Ann Lister, the way she lived, She woke up every morning and embraced life with excitement and with energy and with determination and with integrity and courage and with love, love of learning, love of life itself, love of women. And I think there's just, you don't have to be a lesbian to gain a tremendous amount from reading Ann Lister's work. I think there's something there for every person, especially, maybe for young lesbians who have the most to gain in terms of strength and pride and courage.
I think the legacy of the show is that it's a positive force for change. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't think I've talked to anybody who's watched it who hasn't been affected by it in some way. But not just that. I think it shows what you can do with genre on TV. It's in a slot on a Sunday night that traditionally was always a kind of sleepy Sunday, granny-friendly period drama slot. And you've got Ann Lister beaming in from outer space to tell her story, and it's almost like she's too busy to be in her own show. And I haven't seen another period drama do that. It's wild and it's exciting and it's just something different, and we really don't see that much on TV.
I think it's such a shame that the show was cancelled after the second season, because for me it's like telling the story of Henry VIII. You get into the third wife and there's 3 more to go, and in order to tell the full story you need to tell everything. I would love Sally to get to finish it, because there'll be other movies, there'll be other books, there'll be other TV shows, hopefully. But like, this is the one that brought Anne to the masses, and like, it's so good. Just, it's that I don't see how you're gonna really get a better, group together to make it. So just, yeah, I'd love for more. But this is it. It's still done that. It got me, millions of people now know who Ann Lister is, because of the show. And that's a huge legacy. That's Anne's legacy that will continue because of a show,
I would never have known about Anne Walker if it wasn't for Gentleman Jack. So it all ties in, even though it's Anne Walker and the real Anne Walker that I research. I'd never have known about her. All this information about her, that not just us, but other people have been finding out as well. Other independent researchers have found out about where she was, what happened to her, the kind of things she liked doing, her diary, all those things would never have been found if it wasn't for Gentleman Jack. And she would just be a grassed over grave at Lightcliff Cemetery. There wouldn't even be a small marker stone for her.
The visual arts has given us so many moments where we can mark time, where, for example, there's Star Wars, where it's before Star Wars and after Star Wars. And it's the same thing for Gentleman Jack. When we saw the show, it hit us all like a thunderbolt, and it's a bit like Ann Lister in many ways. And that's the legacy of it all. The genie is out of the jar now, and it's not going back. And I think that's what will always be. And I think that's an amazing thing.
There's that saying, like, Helena Whitbread's books lit the fuse. Somebody said that. Well, like, the show's kind of like the blowtorch or whatever, because books just don't have the reach, and the show is what brought Anne out there.
Наследие шоу, оно уже есть. Вы же посмотрите, сколько судеб, сколько историй, сколько людей объединило, да? Объединил этот сериал, сколько людей работает над изучением Энн Листер, Энн Уокер, сколько сайтов открылось, сколько людей между собой коммуницирует, общается, и создается там много, и движение идет вперед. Я думаю, что это только начало, и если дальше будет больше, скажем так, это мое мнение.
I think for me, it's just so important for us to have representation in the media. Things are being cut left, right, and centre, and we're not seeing women like us on TV as much anymore. And I think back to how I was 2 years ago. And I think that there might be someone like me that needs to see that, and they deserve to see that. And the story of Anne and Anne resonates with so many of us, as you will know from speaking to this amazing community. It's just so important that we have that, and we see ourselves, and we know that we've been here a very long time. There are a lot of people that need that, and their lives will change because of it. And it's just not good enough that we're not seeing that on TV anymore. So we need it.
There's a scene in season 1 where the Annes are in bed together, and Anne is the first suggests the idea of something like a marriage.
A private understanding. But yes, in all other respects, very much like a wedding. You'll get fed up of me. Wonder why you have such a poor opinion of yourself. I don't when I'm with you. When I'm with you, I could take on the world.
And that's the kind of feeling we get from having the Annes in our lives, from having the show in our life. With them, we can take on the world.
I've learned a lot from the Annes. There's such a wonderful example for all of us to say, you can do it. You can do anything you want to do. And that's Anne Lister. You can do anything you want. And also my dear sweet wife used to say all the time, as long as you're breathing, there's hope. That was one of her favorite expressions. And this idea that faith is all, that Anne says, or Mary's saying, as long as you're breathing, there's hope. It gets you up in the morning, and move you away from the couch, recliner, or whatever it is that your whole body wants to fall into.
It's hard for me to imagine what life would have been without this show. But the best I can say is would have been more boring. I think I would have lived a less out life.
Had I not found the show, I think my life would be a very pale shade of what it is now. I think I would still be in sort of a rut, and not living life to its fullest, not having the self-realization, the self-confidence that I have now.
Скажем так, что цилиндр я носить и трость не стала. Там не одеваю кольца, которые есть в фильме на руках у Сюран там, и так далее. Но это внутреннее ощущение, да, это ощущение силы, ощущение храбрости. Вот я думаю, что вот это чувство идентичности, оно вот у меня, оно внутри.
I said I would never ever get involved with TikTok because it's embarrassing, and it still is. That's I don't know, actually. It's quite hard to think back to what I was like before because I have changed so much because of Gentleman Jack. And that sounds crazy to me, actually. And if I'd heard myself say that 2 years ago, I would have been like, get a grip, Vicky, it's a TV show. But it's brought me confidence in myself. It's brought me friends. I came out to my parents because the show made me feel comfortable enough to do that. And I finally saw, and I mean Anne Walker here, I finally saw someone in media that I could relate to completely, on so many levels, and it just kind of changed my mindset about myself and my life, I guess.
My life was fine before this whirlwind of a woman showed up in it. It was ticking along just perfectly, and I think that was a problem because my life was fine. But that wasn't enough. And knowing the story of the Anne gives you the courage and the certainty and the boldness to want more and to go after it. I've done things that I never thought I would have done. My poster is up in tube stations. I've done podcasts and Q&As. I've stood in front of people and told them about my life. I've made a film. And none of that was even possible in my mind before Leanne showed up.
I knew when I first watched the show that I wanted an Anne Lister tattoo of some sort. There wasn't hesitating at all. It was just what is the most important quote. So it says, have some courage. And I think that's something I need to look at probably more than I do. But it's just a reminder, to not shrink into the background all the time and just put myself forward a bit more and just, keep that in mind, keep going.
Abby and I never really discussed marriage as an option before Gentleman Jack, partly due to the fact that Abby is a Christian and believed that a marriage should be something between two people that takes place in a church, and partly due to my opinion that it wasn't really something we needed to do because it would only be for legal reasons. But after watching Gentleman Jack and seeing Anne and Anne take a sacrament in a church and see how powerful that was and how meaningful it was, and then comparing that to our lives today and how privileged we are to be able to get married and show our love in a public way, it changed our perception on getting married. We got married in a beautiful little venue in a place called Roxwell, and we couldn't walk down the aisle without giving a nod to Anne and Anne. So Abby came up with the idea of wearing tiny little top hats in our hair, and we walked down the aisle and we stood on the podium of the gazebo, and when the registrar asked, could you take the rings, Abby reached forward and opened the little top hat and my rings were inside. So it was a really nice gesture to them, and obviously we're very happily married.
I had lots of conversations with my family about Gentleman Jack and about why I was visiting York, Shipton, and going to archives, and I think what was important to me was they'd accepted me for who I was, but it was also about just explaining that this is not a fad. It's not a new thing. It didn't come around, with in the 60s or the 50s, or this has been timeless. And now we've got this actual person who wrote down in Anne Lister, who wrote down her feelings about other women. There's no calling them special friends, close friends. You can't deny it. And to have that history and that representation of that history for younger people growing up, I think if I'd have known that it wasn't, if I'd have known that it wasn't unusual or strange to feel the way I was feeling about women, I would have come out a lot sooner than I ever did. And I call them my missing 20s. I wouldn't have had my missing 20s. I would have been out there, living my best life.
I always hid a girlfriend away the 5 minutes. And I'm able to be stage Chris is now street Chris, but I don't mean Chris. I'm able to be me. That the shroud that I had to put over myself, be it church-wise or work-wise, I've been able to take that off. Well, look, do you know what that's? It's like a magician and go, there's the darling. And that's how I feel, yeah. That I'm able to be who I was originally meant to be and who I hid so far back in the closet that I got bored of Turkish delight, and now I'm back at where I'm meant to be.
My favorite part are these small moments to me when I really have the chance to stand up for myself and to show that I'm gay and that I'm proud to be gay and I'm not hiding anymore. And the satisfaction that gives me after this is really tremendous.
I can say it's okay. I am what I am. I always was the way I am now. But there are certain ideas how women have to look how they have to behave and so on. And I'm now 62, so I was raised with these spirits. And it took me a long time to keep distance to those ideas. But with the show, it makes me more easier to be what I am. Mm-hmm.
I never thought that I would be confident being out. I always thought I'd feel some level of shame or internalized homophobia. I have struggled with that so much. And I can genuinely credit the show and the people that I've met through the show, people who have been around much longer than me, I mean that in the nicest possible way, to have their wisdom and see their courage, the people that have gone before me, and Lister and Walker, my friends that I now, hold very dear. It has given me so much more confidence in myself, and I can honestly say hand on heart, I wouldn't have had that without a show. I'm just a completely different person now than I was before I discovered it.
There's so much I would say to the end if I could, but mostly I hope they know. I hope that somehow they see the change and the strength that their lives inspired, and I hope that the people who worked on the show know it too. So much has happened because of them and because of what they created. And I hope that years from now, people will still be talking about how much the show changed their lives and how much knowing the story of the Anns has affected them.
First, I would say to the Anns on a humorous note, lock the doors.
I would probably end up talking about fungus or brains or some science nonsense within the first 10 seconds.
I think I would say to them that 200 years from now, you will succeed, you will have such an impact on people's lives that you could never imagine you had, maybe, because of them being then. Without Anne Lister being the woman that she was, she wouldn't have helped Anne up that hill.
Anne Walker, well, I think I'd just give her a big hug. And I'd just say thank you, because she's made such an impact on my life and lots of other people's lives. And she probably would never in a million years have thought that would have happened, but she's actually left such a huge legacy and touched so many people's lives. So I would hug her and thank her.
Probably say to Anne Walker first, thank you for being courageous enough to love someone who had a lot of flaws, who had a lot of struggles, and who did not fit in the world the way that other women did. Thank you for loving someone who was a work in progress and standing by Anne's side. And if I could go to Anne Lister, I'd walk over and say, Anne, you are a work in progress, and that is okay.
Thank you for sharing your lives, your hopes, your loves, your hates, your affairs, everything, especially Anne Lister. Thank you for sharing your life with us. And with Anne Walker, thank you for showing what courage is.
I am a screenwriter and a storyteller, and I know that art is life, and I know that art gives life. So to all the people who created and were involved in the production of Gentleman Jack, I say thank you for giving me my life through your art.
I would say thank you for helping me heal. Thank you for leading me to my tribe, my people, my friends, my family. Just thank you. Thank you for introducing me to Anne, and thank you for being fearless and unapologetic in doing so.
It's so, so important for so many people like me to see shows like this. And sometimes you have to think, doesn't that outweigh, can't we have shows like this that, speak to people and mean so much to people and not just money-making machines? to the actual ends, just I hope you know how much you mean to everybody because you've changed lives.
She deserves a big thank you for inspiring people like me to be the oddities that they are and to be as weird and as wonderful as we are. And, you know, she's helped us build this community, which will hopefully then inspire younger generations to be who they really are.
Thank you for having the courage to be together. You know, it wasn't an easy time, and it wasn't easy to do that. And it makes you feel less alone. The things that we go through today, this has been happening for a long, long time. We're not anything new. And it's just, you know, to know that they existed and they came before us, it's really comforting. So thank you for living your lives.
Thank you. I would say thank you. Thank you so much.